Welcome to Inner Peace Better Health, where we explore the practices and the perspectives that nurture deep well being, mind, body, and the soul. So, dear listeners, today we are entering sacred ground. Yes, not just of the theology, but of the transformation. Because what if your best self isn't something that you have to invest or the invent, but something you rediscover by learning to think, pray, and love like Jesus. Yes. So joining me today is James Early. So welcome to the show, James.
Hi, Avik. It's great to be here. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, James, for joining us today. And before we delve deep into this topic, I'll quickly love to introduce you to all the listeners. So, dear listeners, James is a Bible teacher, spiritual coach, and the host of the Bible Speaks to You podcast, so which has reached listeners in over 200 countries. Yes. So since 2008, James has led powerful Bible study workshops at the Federal Correctional Institution of Danbury City, helping countless people experience the freedom on inside and out. Yeah. So through his Jesus mindset coaching, James invites us uh, not just to admire Jesus, but to live like him with radical compassion, spirituality, clarity, spiritual clarity, and the mindset of peace. So, dear listeners, I'll not take much of your time. Let's get into it. Welcome to the show again, James.
Thank you very much.
Amazing, amazing. So, James, like, uh, thinking like Jesus is such a powerful idea. What does I mean, if you can share, like, what does this mean to you, uh, not as a doctrine but as a daily practice?
Oh, I love that way you asked that question
Hmm.
because too many times we make something into a doctrine and then we just think we believe it. But if you don't live something out in your daily life, it's like learning math and never doing any homework problems, never learning how it actually works and put it into practice to figure things out. So I love the way you asked that question. I want to start by just sharing with your listeners how I
Hmm.
got into this idea. I came across the place where Paul says to the church in Corinth, this is First Corinthians chapter 2.
Hmm.
At the end of chapter 2, he says, "We have the mind of Christ."
Correct.
And that really jumped out at me one day, and I thought, well, what does that even mean? We usually think
Mm.
about our own little minds and we have to figure things out for ourselves. But what is the mind of Christ? If we have the mind of Christ, Paul doesn't say we will have it later. He says right now. So if we have the mind of Christ, then that means we can start to think with the mind of Christ. I think we all need to consider those possibilities.
Mm.
So now I take back when I read through the Gospels, anytime I read a story about Jesus, something he did or said, or how he treated people, how he responded to questions, I say, well, um, what was he thinking?
Mm.
How was he thinking? What was the perspective he looked at things from? People used to
True.
say, well, what would Jesus do? That was a very famous saying several
Mm.
years ago. People still say that. What would Jesus do? I think it's more important to say, what would Jesus think? How would
Yeah.
Jesus love in this case? How would he love that person? Because your thinking comes
Mm.
first before the actions. And so, how did Jesus think? I think the very most important aspect of that is that he started his ministry this way. He said, "The kingdom of heaven is at hand."
Mhm.
What if we
Yeah.
really believed that? What if we really understood that, um,
Mhm.
and and lived our lives practicing that idea? Well, then, what it does for me is when I see someone
Mhm.
struggling with the problem, and I think,
Mhm.
well, what's true in the kingdom of heaven? That problem whatever it is, isn't
Yeah.
part of them in the kingdom of heaven. And so I can
Mm,
love them more. I can be more compassionate. I can say an encouraging word. And it's not just
mm,
me saying words, it's because I really see how much God loves them in the kingdom of heaven at this very
mm,
moment. And that changes the way I interact with people. And I mean, I could talk for hours about this, but I'm going to leave it right there to kind of give you an idea, I think, of how to think like Jesus is to see things or see what he saw in the kingdom of heaven as God being in control, God loving everyone. There's always hope. There's always an opportunity to bless and heal, and then the way we treat people with that love. And when you treat someone with love, usually they respond in a way that they don't if they're not treated with love.
yeah. Understood. Wow. So, okay. So, what the one mindset shift like from Jesus that has personally transformed how you live or uh, see others? What do you have to say?
Oh, I think
Mm,
there are lots of them, but the one that comes to me right now that I think is probably the hardest one to do sometimes um, is Jesus's famous um, prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane when he said, "Not my will, but thine be done."
mm,
That was not a new idea.
okay.
He had the same idea throughout his whole ministry. He said, "I didn't come to do my own will. I didn't come to
Hmm.
teach my own ideas. I came as a servant of the Father to do whatever he told me to do, to say whatever he said." And so to me, the biggest shift has been getting myself out of the way, letting go of my
Mm,
opinions, my preconceptions, my my will about the way I think
mm,
something should happen,
mm,
and saying, "Okay, God, I am your servant. You just tell me what to do." I mean,
correct.
I don't do that at every minute of every day, but that's the thing was the biggest shift for me is um, doing what God wanted instead of what I wanted.
Okay, got it. Understood. So, okay. Uh, so if I have to say this like this, I mean, um, but first, I definitely love to mention, like, I love this because this makes faith feel alive and intimate, and it's not just about what we believe, but how we show up in the world. That shift changes everything. So, thank you so much, first of all, for sharing that. And uh, you teach people how to pray like Jesus. That's something I really love. Like, not just for the comfort, but for the connection. So, how is I mean, how is this kind of prayer? It's actually different from the way most people are taught to pray. What do you have to say?
Oh, I absolutely love this question, Avik.
Mhm,
You're right. Most of us are taught to pray. We ask God for something we need. We tell God we have a problem. We talk to him like he's an old man that's hard of hearing. We shout, we say it over and over. But Jesus said
mm,
God already knows what we need. Um,
yes.
and he said, he gave us a clue. Well, obviously, he taught us how to pray with the Lord's Prayer. Um,
Mm,
and there's some real interesting things in there. How many times when you pray, I'm
mm,
asking now all your listeners, when somebody prays, uh,
yeah.
do you do you ask God? Do you start with the problem and tell God what the problem is? You look at the Lord's Prayer. The whole
Mm,
first half of the prayer is just acknowledging God, praising God, uh, praying for His will. You don't even the only thing about you in the first half of that prayer is when you say, Our Father, you're establishing your
mm,
relationship with God. And the rest of it's all about God. And then you get into, will give us what we need and forgive us and protect us.
yeah.
Um, and so I think that's a clue. The what I'll say briefly is the way Jesus prayed, I think, was not so much asking God for something, but he was bearing witness to what was already true spiritually. For example, This gets back to this idea of the kingdom of heaven being at hand. For example, when, let's say, blind Bartimaeus came to him and said, "Have mercy on me, heal me of my
Yeah.
blindness." And in you know, to everyone there, here was a man that was blind. I think Jesus saw something different. He saw what was true about this man in the kingdom of heaven. There is
Mm,
no
yeah.
blindness in the kingdom of heaven. And so, um,
Mm,
he saw that so clearly that in the kingdom of heaven, this man could not be blind. This this cat that was here right
exactly.
now, and so that was like a light switch turned on, and everyone else then said, "Oh my gosh, the guy's healed." Now,
Mm,
from the
yeah.
perspective of earth, the guy was blind and Jesus
Mm,
healed him. But from the perspective of heaven, he never was
mm,
blind in the first place. So to me,
yeah.
praying like Jesus is acknowledging what's already true in the kingdom of heaven, and then realizing that as Jesus promised us, the kingdom of heaven is here, is within us. Now that's a completely different. You're looking out from heaven instead of trying to get up there. It's kind of a different perspective. I hope that's
Yeah.
helpful.
Exactly, exactly. And also here, one more thing, this thing where I definitely wanted to ask, like, what would you say to someone who feels like prayers are not working for them, or maybe you can say aren't working, or maybe going unanswered? So, what would you suggest them?
Oh gosh, that could be so many different things. I would really have to talk to an individual to find out, uh,
Mm,
where they're coming from, because I've talked to a lot of people and why they
mm,
feel their prayers and the way they're praying. It's like you have five different people and they're five different
yeah.
reasons. So sometimes it's because we're praying for what we want. Sometimes we're not listening to God. Sometimes we really don't know God. We're just repeating words, and we think um, that we're just saying these rote prayers. And sometimes there's a lot of fear uh, underneath the surface that we're not dealing with. Sometimes there are things, sometimes we're not being honest with ourselves. Um, I know how sometimes my prayers haven't been answered because there was, I felt, uh, evil influences. You could call it the devil or whatever you want to, how you ever want to talk about that. The carnal mind,
Mm,
Paul. So also these negative influences. Uh, if I have, um, if I'm feeling resentful
mm,
and angry towards someone and haven't forgiven them and haven't repented of my sins, whether
mhm,
they're big or little sins, sometimes that's what keeps us from seeing our prayers answered. And sometimes we put our ladder up the wrong wall. We're praying for things that are not right. And
mm,
so, I mean, there's so many different ways to answer that question. I would love to, if anybody's listening and
mm.
wants to talk to me further about this, I'd be happy to talk with you, individually about um, prayers and stuff. So, um,
Wow, that's amazing, I have to say. Yeah. And so because that question of am I doing it wrong comes up so often with the prayer. Even I have heard with a few of my known as well. So like and your perspective offers a gentle reframe that gives people their agency back. So yeah, yeah. And also, I'll talk about your podcast. Like the Bible speaks to you. Uh, it reaches the heart across the globe. So, what inspired you to start that, and how has it deepened your own faith and the peace?
Oh, it's interesting. My podcast actually is an outgrowth of
Mm,
my prison ministry. As you mentioned, I've been doing Bible study at the Danbury,
mm,
Connecticut federal prison since 2008.
mhm,
And I've gone every week except for COVID and when I'm on vacation or something. And
mhm,
in teaching the Bible to the people in prison, I kind of found my voice about how to talk about the Bible and how to share ideas and let the people discover for themselves the message that God
Mhm,
was speaking to them through the Bible. And so they would say to me, "Oh, Mr. Early, that's been so helpful. You've restored my faith in God, and all these things." And I've thought, well, I've got to find a way to
mm,
share these ideas on a broader way, and that's why I started the podcast. And as you said, I've had listeners in now over 200 countries and territories. Um,
mm,
so, how has it affected my growth? Is I'm sharing actually each week. I'm sharing what I'm learning as I go. I don't claim to have all the answers. I don't claim to do everything perfectly, but I'm sharing what I'm learning from my own Bible study. I'm sharing what I'm learning from helping other people. I'm sharing
mm,
how I've wrestled through questions I have in the Bible. And
mhm,
so when you put yourself out there, whether it's in a Bible study at your church and you're trying to tell other people, share some
mm,
ideas, it's like at some point there've been a couple of times where I felt like I was just saying the words and I realized I had to get back to the source myself. I had to
mm,
go back to the Bible. I had to re I loved your word earlier, rediscover who you are as a child of God. Yeah, I had to rediscover my relationship to God. I couldn't just coast on previous inspiration. you know,
yep,
we're praying for our daily bread in the Lord's Prayer.
mm,
We need daily communication with God, daily um, listening to God and seeking His guidance. And so I think that's what I probably learned the most is
mm.
um, keeping my relationship with God at the front here, so that I'm not sounding like a hypocrite to somebody.
Okay, okay. No, I totally understand. Yeah. And so this might sound contradictory, but it's actually not. Like some people say that the idea of thinking like Jesus is unrealistic, that Jesus was divine and we are just human. So how do you respond to that belief?
That's a really good question, and I know that struggle because, like, who am I to say I can think like Jesus or say that you can? Well, I
Mm,
go back to what Paul says, "We have the mind of Christ." It's not saying that you are Jesus, obviously. I'm not That's not at all what I'm suggesting, but, um,
mm,
you can't think like Jesus with
mm,
your own human mind. Paul
mm,
says we have to put off the old man, the old way of
mhm,
thinking, and put on be renewed in the spirit of our mind, and then put on the new man, the new way of thinking, the new way of seeing things, this new sense of
mm,
who we are. And like you said, we rediscover who we always have been as a child of God. Um,
mm,
and so yeah, say, well, I'm just human. Well, yeah, Jesus was human too, as
mm,
well as reflecting this divineness. He embraced both humanity and divinity, and so we are the children of God.
mm,
Jesus referred to. He said one time. Um, he said to Mary Magdalene, "I ascend to your Father and my Father." We have the same
mm,
source that Jesus did. In fact, the book of Genesis in the very first chapter says we're made in God's image and likeness. Now,
mm,
so I think we reflect to some degree that
mhm,
divine nature of God, the spiritual, that's what gives us our spiritual identity.
mm,
And so we have the right as children of God. And look at Romans chapter 8. Paul says that we are heirs of God, joint heirs with Christ. So I think sometimes
mm,
these false man made doctrines have made us afraid to claim
mm,
our spiritual inheritance as children of God, as joint heirs with Christ of all God's bounty, all God's um, spiritual abundance.
mm. Exactly. Yeah. Amazing, amazing. So, James, thank you so much for reminding us that peace doesn't have to be distant and that thinking praying and loving like Jesus is not just a spiritual aspiration, but a daily alignment. So, thank you so much for this. And for the listeners, maybe today you felt a nudge in your spirit, a whisper that it's time to return to your heart, to real connection, to deeper faith. So, thank you so much. Start small, start simple, and remember that you already have what it takes to love more like Him. And before we move, so James, if someone wants to connect with you, how they can connect?
Okay, the I have created a special page on my website just for you who are listening today to this podcast.
Hmm.
If you'll go to my website, thebiblespeakstoyou.com forward
Hmm.
slash peace, that comes from the title, part of the title of your podcast. There are some resources there. I have a little, if when you subscribe to my podcast, I'll send you a little prayer guide that talks about how to pray with the mindset of Jesus. There's
Hmm.
also a playlist of previous episodes that talk about embracing the mind of Christ and how we can think like Jesus. And then, if you're really serious about taking all this to a on a kind of a next step, uh, you can
Hmm.
sign up for a 1 hour free coaching call in my Jesus Mindset program to see if that's a good fit for you. So I will send you that link. And but just if you're listening and want to jot this down, thebiblespeakstoyou.com forward slash peace. That's the best way to get
Hmm.
a hold of me.
Perfect, perfect. Lovely, great. So, dear listeners, this is your host Avik signing off from Inner Peace, Better Health. May you walk forward towards today with more kindness, clarity, and the courage. So, thank you so much.